Everyone, welcome to this evening's edition of Socialist Telly. We're talking about matters around health and, unsurprisingly, around COVID. We heard today the news that schools are going to get 2 weeks' notice of when they're going to be reopened, which is pretty tight for parents, families and teachers to organise around. So on this show, I've got the lovely Jane Park. She's an educational psychologist. I want her input on what we can expect for the children. And also we've got Steph Layton on, and she's going to tell us about her experience with her kids and COVID and so on. So would either of you like to add anything to your introductions there?
No.
Not from me, Bonnie, but thank you. And it's lovely to be able to be here.
Thank you, Jane. How about you, Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy.
Good.
I'm happy.
So Jane, tell me what educational psychology services are like in schools, what they were like pre-COVID, how much workload were you under, and how well resourced or otherwise were your services?
Well, I mean, what we want to kind of let people know is that educational psychology services across the country have never closed, just like our schools. And we've been there all along, trying to work remotely as best we can. Obviously, we haven't been able to go into schools, and there have been periods of lockdown as well. But really, the biggest focus for EP work in the last few months has been around the well-being of children and young people attending our schools, and also huge focus on staff well-being, because we're mindful of the intense pressure that schools have been working under, the constant changes, the challenges to staffing, and all of that without any additional funding or budgetary support. And that's coming from EPSs where there aren't enough of us to go around either. So we've been working really, really hard since March last year, which is quite extraordinary to comprehend.
Yeah, no chance for a holiday for you guys?
None whatsoever, and really mindful that staff haven't been able to, right through the whole of the summer term, when with the first lockdown was happening, school staff were working really hard to try and get ready to reopen. And then they had so much uncertainty about when that was going to happen. And it really takes its toll on, the levels of stress and anxiety that schools manage under usual circumstances has been amplified so greatly. And staff will tell you they didn't have a break over the summer because they were preparing for children to come back in September. And that return from lockdown has been a really challenging process, and it's credit to the incredible skill of our school staff that they've managed it so well, and children have actually been coming back and doing really well.
That's good to hear, but it's not without the sacrifices of the adults supporting them. I mean, I remember when I first started teaching back in the early 2000s, it was still possible to get like a multidisciplinary team to support children who had certain issues. Over the years that I was teaching, we saw those levels of support being taken away, chopped away, thanks to years and years of austerity. And I can only imagine, I stopped teaching about 8 years ago, I can only imagine it's got considerably worse since then. So then add on to that the crisis that we're seeing for everybody's mental health, and the fact that the teachers and the classroom assistants and everyone else are being run ragged and have probably got their own concerns as well. How much mental space do they have to give the kids the support they need? Steph, what's your experience?
What, with COVID at the school?
Well, not so much at the school, but how has the experience of the coronavirus affected your family?
It's destroyed my family. So as you know personally, my mum got COVID in April. 25th of April she was diagnosed, and I had to send my kids away. I had to send them to their dads, and it took me about 2 weeks after her getting sick to get a test, and then it took a week to get results, and then I couldn't see my children. My mum was non-responsive for 27 days.
Wow.
So she was sent home from St Helier to die because they didn't have a ventilator, and they had to make a choice. Basically, it was somebody a lot younger, or so. My mum's only 60, and she's a very fit, young, healthy 60, and I couldn't see my children. And I'm trying to ring my children, but they're crying, and they don't want to show me that they're crying because she was sent home to die, and that emotionally broke my children, because they were then scared that would be me.
Of course.
They was in a very safe place. They was with their dad. He tried to make it as fun as he could, but they were terrified. They were very, very scared, and it was nearly 3 months till they felt safe enough to come in the house.
My goodness.
And then, you know, all of a sudden school was back open and anxiety went through the roof. No one took it. Everybody takes it seriously, but it's not until it affects you directly that you understand the damage that it can do. And going back to school, it was emotionally and mentally very hard for them. It was terrifying because they were the only ones wearing masks. They felt really left out. They felt like they were going to get bullied. They felt like they had a lot of frustration towards everybody in their classroom, their teachers, because they weren't wearing masks. They didn't want to talk about it because they didn't want to be made to feel different. You know, it's been horrible. They love school. My kids absolutely love school. They enjoy homework, which is bizarre. You know, they're really enjoying home learning. But going back to school for them, instead of being an amazing day, was traumatic. I mean, it was days of tears, anxiety, panic attacks, getting home from school. I've got a headache. I've got a tummy ache. I think I'm going to be sick, just because they didn't feel brave enough to be able to say, I don't want to go anymore. But I gave them the choice. It was, you either wear the mask or I pull you out. That's your choice to make. You're 13. You will have to decide. I can't decide for you. You know, and it's not fair. They're babies. They shouldn't need to make that call.
And it's
but then it was like, oh, often, huh?
Sorry, I was going to say, it's put you in a really difficult position as well. Obviously, you've had all that stress and anxiety about your mum, because your mum's still not very well even now, is she, all this time onwards?
It's damaged her lungs, her brain, her heart, her kidneys. She's gone from running 7 nursing homes and walking absolutely everywhere, having a social life that I could only dream of, to be in need to be, I have to carry her up the stairs. I have to assist her down the stairs. I have to shower her. She can't make a drink anymore. She can't manage her own medication. I mean, there is no medication for COVID. There's nothing they can give her, but the damage it's done has been catastrophic. And they don't know if that damage has now stopped or if it's continued or if it will be permanent. No, but my children see that. My children are picking their nan up off the floor. My children are listening to her cry all day because she doesn't really know what day it is anymore. People judge my mum, you know, like the girls will take her out for a walk in a wheelchair and they feel like people are staring because they're wearing masks, they're wearing visors. And it's not, you know, it's terrible. I mean, she's one of thousands.
She is, and she's very lucky that she's got the sort of family and upbringing that you're able to give them. Your girls have a really solid grounding, and they've, you know, apart from this crisis that's going on, there isn't other stuff that could affect them. This in itself, I would have thought, Jane, you're the expert, it's something that could have a profound effect on the well-being of those kids.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what we need to think about, you know, the professionals supporting children and the policymakers and the government is to get away from these narratives of needing to catch these children up. We need to focus on their mental health and well-being as the first port of call. We've had, so our EP colleagues across the country have been carrying out some surveys around pupil voices, and overwhelmingly what they're telling us is that they need and want to feel safe in schools, and particularly in secondary schools. A lot of them were telling us that although they realised that the staff there were doing all they could to help them feel safe, they had, you know, other children in the class weren't wearing their masks, other children in the class were struggling, and these children that we were talking to understood that they were struggling, and it was coming out in their behaviours because they were so anxious and because they were so upset, and everything about the context in which our children are living and what helps them to feel safe, it is not there anymore. And these are huge challenges. You know, forget about catch-up curriculum, forget about that. We've got to focus on their mental health and well-being right now. And the majority of children are doing okay, and we have to be honest, and we have to be pleased about that and understand what the factors are that have contributed to that. It's all about relationships. It's about trust and safety, and their family being a network of support for them, but also schools having that really important function as well. And, you know, all these narratives around getting the children back into school, unless it's safe, unless they feel safe and secure emotionally and physically, they're not going to be able to access these higher order learning anyway. And we have to be really realistic about how meaningful education is going to be under those circumstances. And Steph, I just want to, my heart goes out to you listening to those experiences, and just how dreadful that is, and what incredible strength you show being able to come here and talk about it so openly. It must be incredibly painful for you.
It's terrible. I appreciate it. No one says anything. It's just, you were sick. You must have been reckless. She wasn't reckless. She was at work.
Made vulnerable. And I think this is something that's coming out in the figures. National Education Union figures were coming out the other day about the risk to teachers and the risk to teaching staff and the risk to older students as well. And this data has been known about, and yet schools were made to open on with the 6th of January and all go back when that information was known. What is this government doing to help keep our teachers and our staff who have families, who have children, who have parents who are at risk? What are they doing to keep us all safe?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that occurs to me is looking at the people who are most affected by COVID and the people where the highest rates are. It's amongst your frontline workers, like Steph's mum, who's running a care home. Teachers are frontline workers. They're being forced to work without adequate PPE or without any PPE in a classroom in front of 30 plus children, as are classroom assistants, catering staff, cleaners, and so on, doing all of that work with no PPE on. But the irony is, they travel to their workplace on public transport, the expectation will be that they wear a mask for their 10-minute bus journey. It's totally illogical. And the mum, I see kids experience things through a lens of, does this make sense? Is this logical, and is it fair? And I think that the children, kids never underestimate how bright kids are, whatever age they are. My view is they see a hell of a lot more about what's going on around them than we sometimes give them credit. And the idea that kids knew that their parents were being forced to send their kids back to school last September, whether they were happy about it or not, would have caused, again, Jane, I'm speaking where it's your field, but for me personally, that caused me a great amount of stress, worried about maybe potentially putting my kids in the line of fire. We could see of course the numbers were going to go up. Kids, my world, are in the middle of the community. They have grandparents, they have siblings, they have friends, the teachers do too, they go to the shops with their parents after school and so on. So the idea that the virus wouldn't be spread in schools was ludicrous from the outset to me, because I've said it before, schools can't handle the transmission of nits. If they can't stop kids from spreading nits, how are they going to stop this one?
You're so right, and it's thinking about the impact on the children and young people going back to school. I think what we saw as support professionals in our service, schools know their populations really well, and they knew which children to look out for who they thought might wobble, particularly in September coming back. What they didn't anticipate is how destabilizing this was for so many children, and how anxiety management had to be at the forefront of their educational provision. And we know without emotional health and emotional stability, learning isn't going to happen. So as a foundation, teachers were really having to put their focus on that. And yet above them, the pressure was Ofsted are going to come in and have a look at you. You need to be thinking about catching up, all the lost learning, children must be in school for their learning, and all these narratives that just didn't make any sense when you were thinking about the lived experience of these children at home and coming back and bringing those anxieties. They're sitting there in class worrying about their family's health, worrying about whether their dad has lost his job, all of those pressures that they're having to manage. Where do they put all of that? And that's why for us, looking at supporting staff in schools has been such a high priority, because if we look after them, they're in a better position to look after their children. But this is all coming from within. This isn't in response to any kind of government guidance or anything like that. This is about us as professionals knowing what our children need.
So I would think that there is going to be a whole programme of packages available probably to every kid, realistically actually to every family in the country, if we are able to come out of this pandemic anytime soon. Because we're going to see, as a teacher and as a parent, I understand that my kids are happiest if they know what to expect, if there's some level of continuity and consistency. When things go up in the air, anyone will get stressed out about it. So as you said, Jane, you know, there is uncertainty about parents' employment. There's uncertainty about granny who lives with his health. There's the fear of, how bad will I feel if I go and visit granny after school and she ends up catching COVID and then it's my fault? You know, all of these things are going to stop any processing of any learning they've done. The question I have to ask is, who on earth are we comparing these kids to? You know, they're saying kids are going to have to catch up with what? With who? The whole country's in a unique situation. We've never been here before. And yes, our country's handled it worse than pretty much every other developed economy in the world, with the worst impact on the economy. Absolutely. You know, our kids should be no further behind than kids in other countries or their peers, because at the end of the day, unless you go to Eton and you've got a different set of options to you, the majority of our kids are all in the same boat, all got the same problem. What do you think, Steph, that kids would benefit most from now? You know, we're in this situation where we don't know how long. Allegedly, the majority of kids don't need to be at school, although the reports I'm getting is that we've probably got about 80% of kids at school. So
yeah, they need to find a happy medium. I don't understand why they didn't freeze education and just carry on with like constant homework. Or that my girls, I cannot fault my girls' school with their homeschooling. It has been second to none. I even emailed to say how well they were doing. But a lot of my friends' children's schools are, you know, I mean, it's bad. They're having like an hour, log in whenever you like. That's not really fair. They should have froze education or extended education, because it's not fair. You know, I mean, I'm using right now my child's laptop because I couldn't afford to buy 3. So they've got it, they need it. Other families, they're just sharing one between like 3 or 4 kids. That's not fair. Why should you have to sacrifice your free education? You're never going to get free education again. It's not going to happen.
Another argument.
So why is it being sacrificed? But it's like, you know, nobody expected this to happen. It's nobody's fault. It's just one of those things. So the children now, they are our future. They're going to be our new Boris Johnson. They're going to be our new doctors,
not
our
our
nurses,
kids, I hope.
Better than Boris. They'll all know how to brush their own hair. But, you know, this is free education and they need it. And right now they're at an age where they're developing all their like personalities and what they like and what they love and what they're passionate about and what they don't like. But, you know, this has thrown a massive spanner in the works. So while they're going through all the stages of working out who they are, why do they have to be, oh, I'm worried about school. Oh, I'm worried about my GCSEs. Oh, I'm worried about this. It should have been a case of, please don't worry. We understand. We're going to give you some work and then we're just going to extend education. Instead of finishing in 6th form, there'll be like another 2 years added on to school. It's not fair, but it's the best solution, in my opinion. The best solution. They should have froze it. I mean, my children basically missed the whole of year 8. And so many children missed all of year 7. Now all of a sudden they're year 8. My cousin missed the last year at school. Now she's out of school. She can't go to college. And then she's just lost in the system now.
Yeah.
That's just her. She's done. That's not fair. She should have got the extra year. It was taken away from her.
It's these formative experiences, isn't it? So children are telling us about loss. You know, you're thinking about year 6s moving into year 7 in the summer, all of those, you know, the end of year production, the parties that they would have had, the celebrations, they haven't had it. And it's such a huge loss for them. And thinking about really little ones who've maybe they've missed the transition from nursery into reception, or they haven't had their whole reception year. And now they're being expected to sit at a desk and do writing. And you're talking about 5-6-year-olds, and they're saying what? And of course they're, you know, we're seeing that in their behaviors. Of course we are, because they're letting us know that this is not something that's developmentally sensible in any way. And then schools, I mean, they know the demands of the curriculum are extraordinary, and we know we have, you know, Mr. Gove to thank for that legacy. You know, the sooner we put that to bed, the better. But it's ridiculous. You know, children have got to have the chance to play and to socialize, and all those developmental experiences that they're missing at the moment, which that's for me the main purpose of education. It's not about the qualifications, it's about the rounding of little humans and how they grow up. And they're just so incredibly reflective and resilient and adaptable. You know, working with children is humbling, and we could learn so much if we listened to what they're telling us.
Absolutely. I mean, we do need to learn to listen to our kids. We really do. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me as a former teacher and a mum is that maybe if we had a forward-thinking government, we could potentially avoid the years of PTSD and things that we could be lining up our kids for and our families for, and use this opportunity to maybe nurture some of the things that have been taken out of the curriculum. Thank you, Michael Gove and successive ministers for education and shadow ministers for education. Maybe we could be, perhaps, instead of saying log onto your computer at 8:30 till 3:30 and do the normal lessons you do at school without the benefits of the social interaction with your peers, maybe instead we could be saying, look, here's a trombone, here's a set of drums, here's someone on the computer that can show you how to make some noise, the paintbrush, you know, let's maybe use this as a chance for our kids to get really creative and find out for themselves what it is that they like, because to me that's a way of showing them that they have intrinsic value. It's not about knowing their times tables. Education to me shouldn't be about knowing your times tables. It should be about finding out what things you love, so you can decide from that point when you're older, you know, what way you might want to go for work, what you might like to study a bit more.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. You know, the richness of the curriculum is what children are telling us that they miss the most. They're going into school and the focus is on the core subjects, your SPAG, your maths, your literacy. And when you're talking to children, they say, we really miss being able to do sport and team activities. We really miss cooking. We miss science when we're doing hands-on practicals. And that's about, it's a real leveler when you involve creative endeavors, because you get, you know, children whose talents lie in art or drama or music, and that their main sort of area of interest isn't going to be writing the next set of Shakespeare plays, and it's much more of a leveler, isn't it? It's where everybody can shine, and they're really missing being able to interact with children of other year groups. It's another one of those formative experiences, isn't it, when you know the older ones mentor the younger ones, things like that. They can't even mix with family members within schools. It's just such a strange environment, and it's really difficult for them all to cope, and where they can put all of that, you know, they can't express it through art and music because those things aren't available and so severely limited at the moment.
Absolutely. It seems like a crying shame, really, not to seize this opportunity. I mean, out of the horrors of dreadful situations for children historically, we've seen certain children come up, you know, with most fantastic ideas and the most fantastic records of the things that they've lived through. I mean, one of the most formative books that I read when I was at school was Anne Frank's diary, and you think that child was living like so many of our kids are living right now, not a threat from a foreign body or from an army or whatever, but they're living with a threat of something that you can't see coming. They're having to find a way to build their lives. And diary that she wrote and the imagination that she showed in writing that diary, you just think all of our kids could be the next, you know, we don't want to wish what happened to Anne Frank ultimately in our kids, but just a chance to turn things on its head and maybe make our education provision much more rounded, allow kids a lot more space. I mean, before this hit, I was really aware of my kids' friends, you know, they finished school and then they went to, I don't know, French class, and then they had a karate class, and then they did swimming, and, you know, their lives are so packed with activity, one after the other from school, and they had no place really to process all that they were doing all day, every day. And then all of a sudden, it's like they've hit a brick wall and there's nowhere to put that energy or that interest. I think kids have almost been trained out of knowing how to respond to being bored, maybe. And as an adult, I know that it's when I'm bored that I'll go and pick up a book, or I'll go and find something to do with myself, you know, don't just sit there and stare at the walls. And I think it's a good lesson as well, really. Surely you've got nothing really else you have to do. Why don't you try and do a backflip on the trampoline, or, you know, or pick up that instrument, you know? What do we need to see? I mean, as I say, we don't know if the schools are going to go back after half term or after Easter or in September. So my way of thinking, we need a lot more certainty about this. what do you think, Jane, we need to see for the government to provide to get people over, the stress and the post-traumatic stress disorder that they may be experiencing, both the kids, the staff and the parents? What things do they need to put in place for them?
Well, like we've been saying, the best place to start is by listening to the pupils themselves. And, some of the work that's been done across the whole country, is replicating these patterns of what children are telling us. One of those things is that they actually value the blend of online and in-person learning. And they really like being able to use technology, but they don't want it all day, every day. But actually, it's been quite liberating for them to be able to work at their own pace. And we've seen that some children who were previously struggling at school have actually thrived in lockdown. And you don't always hear about those positive narratives. What we have to do is look at that and say, what is it about our school system that's putting our children under so much strain that they're actually thriving during a pandemic? That should be setting off alarm bells. If I was a government minister in the education department, I would be saying, what have we been doing to our children? The uncertainty that they had last term about whether exams, whether that's GCSEs and A-levels or even SATs, were happening was extraordinary. And they were very, very anxious, not really sure how to pace it. Some of them were finding that the whole year's curriculum was being pushed into last term to make sure that they were prepared, just in case they suddenly had to take their exams, or that their mocks were going to be how they were going to be assessed, or if it was going to be teacher-led again. That uncertainty was enormous. And again, it's taking away their childhood. You've got 15 and 16-year-olds who are sitting up all night working when they should be being able to be free and exploring themselves, exploring friendships and relationships. That kind of pressure is going to explode in adulthood. And it might not be now, and it might not be in 2 years' time, but it will have an impact. Nobody should be having to live with that level of uncertainty. So, we just need our government to take a grip on this situation, frankly. Take the pressure away from schools. Acknowledge that schools have never closed. They have always been open. Our schools have worked incredibly hard, and I don't think they've had anything like the kind of acknowledgement that they should have had. They've had to change at an instant, at a day's notice. I mean, you said that they might have a fortnight to prepare for coming back. They're going to see that as a luxury compared to what they've had to deal with. The changeability and the uncertainty is extraordinary. We just need to acknowledge that we've got to look after our schools and value our schools and the education service a lot more.
So that's a really interesting point, Jane. Something that I noticed when my oldest son was going through the last few years at school, just before COVID, just after their GCSE mocks, a young boy in his class took his life on the railway. And then 2 years later at the same school, and it's not the school's fault, it's the fault of the pressure that is put on our kids. 2 years later, the same thing happened when he was doing his A-level mocks. Now, these levels of pressure, I mean, I've seen it when I was teaching as a primary school teacher. I hated watching what happened to those 10 and 11-year-olds for their SATs. You might argue GCSEs and A-levels are significant because they can impact where you go in life. It seems to be very clear that the pressure that's put on kids in year 6, the 10 and the 11-year-olds, is completely needless. And that you don't need to get ready to be set up for an examination. It's not life. You don't need practice at that. It's something that should happen a couple of times in your life. So we need to take pressure off. I mean, I read a report at the start of the first lockdown when the schools were only open for the key worker or vulnerable, genuinely vulnerable children. There's a difference from those vulnerable kids and the vulnerable kids that are classed as such now. And I read a report that said that they carried out a survey on the mental health of kids last April and compared it to the scores from the April previously. Despite all of the pressures and worries and anxieties of this virus, apparently the kids were actually much happier that they were able to just be at home and knew that they were safe. So I wonder, surely we need another of those studies now and find out. There's some sort of large-scale survey that the government could run for families to fill in, ask the kids and ask the parents separately maybe, because what the kids have to say might be completely different to what the parents would say. See what they think about the prospect of going back, or what they would actually like, because it's got to be child-centered, surely, our education, if it's going to mean anything.
Yeah, but Bonnie, I couldn't agree more. And I wonder what Steph was thinking, because actually when we're talking about assessments, where you've got children in year 6 feeling pressured about their SATs, that should not be their occupation. That should not be their worry. It's not a measure of the children in any way. It's a measure of the school's success. But because of the pressure schools are under, and what will happen to them if for any reason their children aren't reaching those arbitrarily set targets, that's passed on to the children. And Steph, you mentioned your kids are 13, and I wonder if they experience those kinds of pressures and the assessments that they're put through almost on a constant basis.
They do. I mean, I think maybe I raised my children to, as long as you try, that's all that matters. I don't really care what the result is. You tried, good. Don't do all of this constant revising, stressing yourself out, because you've already learned it. The answers are in your head. If you get flustered, you're not going to work. But when they were going back to school, they were having a mock exam or something like that. And then it was like, at the time, we had like 2,500 cases of COVID in our area. And she said, well, why do I have to do it at school? If there was that many people around with knives, I wouldn't have to go in. She's comparing having to go to school, being scared, as if people had knives. And she just couldn't cope with it. But now they're redoing it and she's doing it at home. She's got herself set out at the table. She's thriving. She's loving it. She's absolutely in her best frame of mind for it, because she feels safe. She's calm. She's relaxed. And, they're doing really, like Lily's doing revision at the moment for art. She loves art. She's amazing at art. She's loving it. But when she was at school, really stressed, going to bed late because she's up, she's thinking about it, she's reading, she's looking at this, she's looking at that, and she couldn't cope. Yeah. But now she's at home. She hasn't got to worry about COVID at home. We're very safe here. We don't leave the house. But she's in her own environment. She can work at her own pace. She can get it done. They're going to bed on time. They're waking up fresh as a daisy. Right, let's do this. Let's do that. And they're not stressed. They don't have that fear. They don't have the constant someone's breathing down their neck. The teacher isn't, you haven't done this, do this, do this, do this. The pressure isn't there. And they're thriving. Ella feels like she's doing a lot better than what, like you said a minute ago, she's doing better at home. Yeah. But they love school. They love the social part of school. They do miss it, but they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Yeah. You can't expect someone to thrive in an environment where you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
If I ask you to read a book in your front room or read a book with someone with a gun to your head, you've got to enjoy it more in your own front room. Mm. It's quite simple. They don't feel safe, and it's not fair. Mm-hmm. It isn't fair.
It's a real opportunity, isn't it, though, to rethink the whole of our educational provision. How many times have you as an adult come across another adult saying, oh, I didn't do very well at school, I got like 2 GCSEs and I hated it, but I'm doing the Open University now, I'm going to get a degree, blah, blah, blah. Because it's self-directed, because they've taken it upon themselves to take responsibility for what they're going on to learn, and perhaps we do need to step back a little bit from our kids and let them find their own way so that they can lead their own way going forwards.
Yeah,
I didn't know what I loved till I was in my 20s, and they're 13. Up to about 4 years ago, Ella wanted to grow up to be a caterpillar, for God's sake. She has no idea what she loves, and she's not going to know for a couple of years. But ramming things down her throat that she doesn't love at the moment, with the pressure of, reading her results out in class in front of a load of kids. Why the fuck are you doing that? I don't care what my child got. She tried, and that's what matters. Mm. When she comes home and I'll be like, oh, you didn't get full marks. Why not? It's not going to be that. Did you try hard? Yeah, I did. Perfect.
It's a shame. It's a shame more parents can't see their way to thinking that way, though, Steph, isn't it?
Yeah, but we've got to think about what the pressures are on not just on parents, on teachers. What gets passed down to our children, that somehow valuing, your results are important. Your results are a reflection on the school, and the school is under pressure from above. And this is all about what happens at a higher level in terms of policies and procedures and what is valued. And the schools have little choice in this when nothing is valued above academic attainment. And yet
all that pressure trickles down, and it trickles down right to the babies. It's not fair. Of course it does.
Yeah. And it's not fair. And they grow up, they're having such a different experience of education than we had. We had so much more freedom and so much more years where we weren't assessed. We actually had whole academic years where we didn't have an end of year assessment. I mean, that's unthinkable now for our children. It's constant pressure, constant assessment, and they're looking at each other and, high pressure environments and looking at each other and going, you're slacking off a bit. And all of those pressures come into it as well, social pressures. And they seem to feel, GCSEs are like the pinnacle of everything. And it even trickles down to your year 6 SATs are the pinnacle of everything. Like, forget it. Year 2 SATs. Oh my God, children should not know these things they shouldn't be happening. Get rid of them. Get rid of it all.
Totally. I mean, that would be a really positive move, wouldn't it? If they use this crisis as an excuse to scrap league tables, because I think a lot of the competition comes from the league tables. And as a parent, when I'm looking at schools, I completely ignore where any school is on the league table. I go on the basis of how the teachers present themselves, and if I feel like my child would feel supported there, not whether they'd be pushed to the nth degree, because at the end of the day, kids are smart and they're bright and they've got abilities. They'll do really well so long as someone says you can do it. Go for it.
Yeah, positive, happy kids learn. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, but those data is seductive and it has a power, and it's really, really hard as a parent, as you know, to put blinkers on and not be drawn into those kinds of narratives. And for schools, that's how they attract the brightest minds, families moving into the area or taking up a temporary address. You can understand the pressures
to get the application in, and then they can move somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's a self-perpetuating spiral then, which is incredibly demoralizing if you're involved in that and you're the school that's seen as less desirable, when our staff are working incredibly hard, all working to the same expectations, and happy children still thrive wherever they go. So it's just immense. But we have to look right to the top around policies and guidance for schools to understand what is happening in our children's experience. They can't even keep children safe in a pandemic. Why would we expect them to keep them safe in more kind of typical times?
Absolutely. So Jane, can I ask a question as well? Now that the majority of kids supposedly are on remote learning, remote teaching, or I hesitate to call it home education, because home education is where family take direction, lead the direction for the children's education, whereas this is still teacher-led education. It's just delivered remotely. Can you tell me what happens in normal circumstances if a child has some emotional problems or what have you and might be referred to a person like you? What happens in the current situation for the kids who are at their own home? How do they get the support that they need?
These are hugely challenging times, Bonnie, and as you know well, many of the support services and systems around that may well have supported in such times are long gone, thanks to the coalition, thanks to austerity. The onus is very much put on schools to manage even the pastoral and well-being needs of their children as well, and it's incredibly difficult for them to do that. They're not being given any additional funding or budget or time or reductions in pressure and expectations to be able to do that. I do believe that schools know their children incredibly well, and they know their families incredibly well, because they work so hard to forge those links. And if issues did occur, then there would be ways in which they could access our support. It's highly variable across the country, and you've got some better resourced areas where, for example, parental well-being helplines have been set up, which they can access. In other areas, and you won't be surprised to find it is the areas where, with the highest deprivation, the highest socioeconomic challenges, the least amount of support is available. So yeah, that variability is rather upsetting to know about, and being able, recognizing the problems that families might be facing, but being tied in terms of what you can offer is really, really challenging. But so much of the onus is back on schools to manage everything.
It is. And, one of the reasons I've asked Steph to come onto the show is for various reasons. I opted not to send my kids back in September because I anticipated a massive increase in the number of cases and so on. And because I'm a qualified teacher, I was quite relaxed about being able to carry on learning, and I'm working remotely anyway at the moment, so I'm physically at home and there to help them after I've done my day's work. Steph, as a person with children still registered at a school, what support have you been given any sort of helplines or any advice or support from the school should you encounter difficulties for your girls?
No. Short answer to that, no. I did phone the school because Lily was experiencing a lot of resentment for her children in her class and teachers that were approaching without a mask. She's like, I don't know why it's fair that I've got to ask an adult to move away from me. And she's correct. It isn't fair. So I spoke to their head of year, and, you know, she was very, 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 very lovely on the phone. Very, you know, she put my mind at rest. I told all the girls everything she told me. They can step out of class. They can go speak to her. They can do this. They can do that. But nothing was actually done. So, you know, the girls continue to feel a lot of resentment towards people at school. They continue to struggle. Not struggle in, you know, they enjoy school. They're social butterflies. They love it. They like working from home better, but they enjoy seeing faces. But they obviously right now enjoy seeing faces from like the eyes up. They don't want to be sitting next to somebody in their class, snotting and coughing and think, are you going to make me sick? And is that going to kill my mum? You know, and no support was offered. I phoned, I was told all of this stuff on the phone, which sounded absolutely lovely, told my children, but nothing was done. There was nothing there, you know. But I mean, I must admit, I can't fault them on their at home learning. I mean, every day the teacher comes on, how is everybody feeling? Does anybody need to talk to me after class? Everyone, you can go on the link and then we can discuss things that are worrying you. And that I find amazing, to be honest. I mean, that's above and beyond. So after the lesson, once your job is done, you are more than happy for a pupil in your class to speak to you privately.
That's brilliant.
And I've appreciated that. I really have, because it must be terrible for teachers. You know, there's a class full of 30 kids that all possibly have COVID. Enjoy.
Not good.
No, thank you.
I mean, I guess.
No, it's terrible.
I guess, I'm sorry, Jane has to make a move in a moment. She's a busy, rare as hen's teeth educational psychologist, and she's got things that she's going to need to go on and do. But I guess what we come down to is, in order to avoid a sort of time bomb catastrophe of PTSD for parents and for children and for staff working in schools who are working their socks off and effectively doing two jobs for the price of one, supporting home learning and helping the kids in the buildings, we need to have a really broad net of support for parents, school staff, for kids, set up now so that they're ready to catch people that are beginning to crumble a little bit under the continuing pressure from this crisis. We need one of you in every school, Jane.
Yeah, it'd be great. Perhaps the government needs to fund more EPs, but also what we don't want to do is be reactive. We need to be proactive, and we just have to recognise that the roots of the challenges that families are facing now go a lot deeper than just this pandemic. And this is about uncertainty in their working lives, you know, financial pressures, emotional pressures, you know, the stress that the school environment has been causing, and take the time to reflect on this and think, what could we do better for the well-being of all of our, you know, all of our citizens, because, you know, happy children, looked after, well nourished, well fed, well cared for, well loved, they're going to do okay. We need to make sure we're looking after the people who care for them too.
That's the bottom line, isn't it, really? Let's start investing in our people instead of investing in PPE that's never going to land from whatever country it is you bought it from, and when it comes, it's past its use-by date.
It's just an embarrassment, frankly.
It's not complicated, is it? No, and as you say, that forward planning, Jane, is so important, because we saw the numbers were going to grow. We could see that from a mile off. We can now see that there's probably going to be a massive mental health problem, and mental health services across the piece, not just educational psychology, across the piece, have been cut to the bone from the outset. Well, for at least the last 10 years, if not realistically, probably a good amount of time longer. So we need to get those things in place, and we need packages to support people like Steph's mum, who are suffering from, you know, long COVID. We don't know what the ramifications are of this disease long term. So have a little bit of money and a little bit of thought and a little bit of investment in our health and well-being, I think. It's a message.
Yeah, maybe,
you don't
maybe
know.
the 350 million off the side of the bus would come in quite handy round about now, wouldn't it?
Or
You don't know that this will never happen again. So our mistakes now, we need to learn from, because in 5, 10, 20 years, 100 years, they're going to be right. This is what everybody done wrong. Let's not do that. Because you don't know, we could get over COVID and then it's going to be something else. But you need to learn from where we've made mistakes here. People have gone under the radar. Kids are, kids are kids. Let's send them into school. Let's do this. Let's deprive them of people. That's not fair. You're taking everything away from them that makes them human. You need to learn from it.
Steph, that's absolutely brilliant. You've just said what every parent says to a kid. You messed that up. Learn from your mistakes and do better next time. Brilliant.
But you do, don't you? Because you don't know. This come out of nowhere. And all of a sudden we were hearing about it on the news, and then it's like it's in the UK. We're going into lockdown. Schools are shut. And it's like, okay, shit, what the hell has happened? You don't know it's not going to happen again. So it needs to be very much a learning curve. Because
the bottom line
people,
is we need to learn from other countries as well, from their example. I mean, New Zealand has a completely normal Christmas and New Year, and our government have messed us up big time. We've had the worst death toll and biggest impact on the economy as well, putting us in probably a really serious recession, which is going to have an impact on people's mental health and going to have an impact on, how kids are going to perform, how well they're going to be fed and cared for, and so on. We need to learn from other people's example too, not just our own mistakes. They've got it wrong.
I don't know why they wasn't smart enough to do that. It was so obvious from the beginning that New Zealand was smashing it, and they just thought, no, we'll go a different direction.
Yeah, we just a popularity contest in this country, and not wanting to have the spine to take difficult decisions, but it's all about eating out to help out, and aren't we all jolly?
Oh God.
It's just insanity.
I mean,
that feels like another program.
Yeah, it's possible. We could talk all night about it, couldn't we, really? But it's obviously clear that the government messed up on COVID. They started off with a herd immunity theory. I'm not sure that they ever moved away from that. Obviously the vaccine's coming, and hopefully, please God, that will get us out of this mess. And they've messed up on the economy, with businesses going to the wall, the high street suffering, the arts completely collapsing because you can't go to the theatre or to see a music concert or what have you. But some people have done extremely well out of this, thinking of Serco test and trace app that's questionable reliability, and private providers for PPE and so on. So some people have done really, really well. Just the majority, the 99%, I think someone called it, are paying the price for this government's incompetence. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to thank you both for your incredibly valuable time. I'm going to let you give your laptop back to your daughter, Steph. Thank you. Thank her, please, for the lend of it.
Will do.
It was lovely speaking to you both.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Look after yourselves. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.